Weekly, brought to you from outside of the cricket ground here at Bristol. I forget the sponsor's name, Sid. I wouldn't do very well at...
Say it, Unique Ground.
Thank you very much for that.
It's a very unique name.
So we have just watched Western Storm beat Central Sparks by 7 wickets. It did come down to the last over, but as you wrote in your report, Sid, it wasn't perhaps as close as it looked like it was going to be. I mean, I actually did think at the halfway point, with Storm having to chase down 136, I think it was, that they were going to struggle because it didn't look like a very easy batting pitch, but actually a couple of wayward overs from the Sparks early on really put Storm on their way. They had a massive power play, and from there, you know, it just felt like all that was needed really was for Fran Wilson and all the Prendergast in particular to just kind of manage the game, hit some singles, and they got it down to a runnable fairly early on, and it was pretty plain sailing for the Storm from there. Now we've obviously got other games that are going to be going on this afternoon on the day that we're filming this, which is Sunday. So we don't have a kind of final definitive conclusion as to what the table is going to look like even at the end of today. But both these teams are basically still in it, aren't they, Sid? So Storm and Sparks could still be at finals day next Saturday.
Yeah, mathematically, currently, with none of the other games today finished yet, all those things could happen. Sparks' chances are really slim, and they'd have to get through on net run rate, having come in third level with a couple of other teams. So it's not a good chance, but there is mathematically a chance. Storm's still got a chance as well, but they're also dependent upon lots of other results going their way. So increasingly, it's looking like what it's going to come down to is that it will be those 3 top sides, and it looks like the Blaze are going to get a big win in their game that's going on at the moment. It's just about to, it might have even just about finished right now. So and it looks like they're going to qualify first as a result of that, and then unless Vipers really stuff up their last couple of games, then it's going to be Vipers along with Diamonds off to finals day, where we're looking forward to being next weekend, Raf.
Yeah, at Worcester should be good. So you'll be happy about Vipers being there, although it's possible that we don't know at the time of recording they could have a really big loss to the Diamonds, because they did actually lose to the Sparks yesterday, which was one of the games that we were able to watch from home on the live stream. It was a bit I was going to say rubbish from Vipers, maybe that's a bit harsh, but it felt like they threw it away a bit, didn't it, Sid?
Yeah, you definitely feel that was a game that they could have won and they should have won, and as we both observed on Twitter, we both kind of wrote tweets almost at the same time, I think, that there was really kind of a little bit of a middle order collapse, and they lost 3 wickets caught by Katie George at Cow Corner off the bowling of Erin Burns. Yeah. And it's like, well, you lose the first one of those, you go, okay, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. You lose the second one, well, that was really quite a bad idea. You lose the third one, it's like, what are you thinking, guys? And it was actually kind of interesting because Katie George actually tried to set up exactly the same trap to Danny Gibson today. She put 2 fielders out at Cow Corner and then attempted to invite. I mean, she kind of, it was such an obvious trap that they might as well have scrawled the word trap on the pitch in big white letters, and it wasn't one that Danny Gibson fell for, partly because Katie George didn't actually bowl to the trap on this occasion.
However, Gibson did then, a couple of balls later, hole out on the offside instead.
Yep, she did. So academic in the end. But yeah, so from the Vipers' perspective, it was the other way around. It was Katie George fielding at Cow Corner that took those catches yesterday, and they shouldn't really have offered them to her. They offered them to her on a plate, and after that, they made it very difficult for themselves because they didn't quite get the run rate under that 6, which is what the Storm were able to do today. Once they, as you said, once they got the run rate under 6, they could then just manage their way through it. Yeah. And even though they still needed like 4 runs off the last over, that was partly because they'd gone, well, we don't need to panic here. We can just take this reasonably easily. And all the Prendergast played a really good game, a really mature game. It wasn't spectacular. Fran Wilson played really well and knocked it all around the park, as only Fran Wilson can do. Playing all around the wagon wheel. But all the Prendergast just played really sensibly in a really mature innings. And I think that the Storm will be absolutely desperate to have her back next year if only they can, and maybe also for some of the tournament when it comes to the September. Obviously, she'll have Ireland duty over the next month or so. I think Australia are going to Ireland. I imagine she'll be playing in those games.
That's after the Ashes, of course.
Oh, okay, right. Apologies.
I think, isn't it?
Okay. Well, write in and tell us, guys. Today's quiz: when are Australia playing Ireland? No, but obviously she'll be going back to Ireland. She'll be playing in those internationals whenever they are. But Storm will really like her back in September, I think, and we'll definitely be wanting her back next year. She's been great for them, and get the signature, guys.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that those overseas players, because obviously these teams in regionals are allowed to field one overseas player per 11, can actually be really important and really make the difference. And at the halfway mark, I was giving you Erin Burns headlines, wasn't I, Sid? And then she came on and took a wicket, took a catch early doors, and I thought, well, it's going to be the Erin Burns show, but unfortunately not to be today. But as I say, it does show the importance of those overseas players, and that teams kind of having to be quite canny in a way about signing those, about picking up people, having those connections with people who maybe want to come to England. The money isn't great, but they want to come here and they want the opportunity to play and fight their way into teams. For somebody like Erin Burns, obviously for Prendergast it's a little bit different. It's a bit more about developing her game. But anyway.
But neither superstars. I mean, I think that's the important thing there. The closest that we've come to a superstar in regionals, we've got Deandra Dottin, who's much more of a superstar. We've got Dania van Niekerk, but actually Erin Burns and all the Prendergast have been more effective than either of them, and neither of them are those superstar players. They're just solid pros, but they've been really good picks for their teams and have made a really good contribution. Maybe that tells us something.
Yeah, now obviously the games again in the Charlotte Edwards Cup have been coming very thick and fast this week, so we're not going to give you a rundown of everything that's happened. But
look, another one just whished past. Went past so fast you can hardly see it, Raf.
Thanks for that, Sid.
You rewind the video, guys, you'll be able to see it just whooshing past.
You're ridiculous.
I don't know what you're going to do if you're listening on the podcast version.
Just listen for the swoosh.
Listen for the whoosh.
Anyway, just after we recorded last week's show, or perhaps the day after we recorded last week's episode, there was actually quite a strange thing that happened in the Stars match, which was that they ended up having to use their third choice wicketkeeper, Bryony Smith.
Or is it their fourth choice wicketkeeper?
Bryony Smith, who I think somebody dug out the data, had not kept wicket since age group under 13s. She's obviously now in her, early to mid 20s, so it's over a decade ago the last time that she actually kept wicket. And originally they'd said that they were going to use Alice Capsey in that role, but Surrey then afterwards clarified that it was agreed, or it was decided that would be unwise, given that she's coming back from still adjusting to this new bionic shoulder that she's got. So yeah, perhaps not the best idea for her to be diving around, having missed a few games for the Stars. So yeah, they ended up having Bryony Smith as their wicketkeeper. Now she was actually, I'm going to say, competent, Sid.
Yeah, she did. It was absolutely. They used Bryony Smith, and it was absolutely fine. I mean, it was more than fine. She did a perfectly decent job. She took a stumping. She didn't mess anything up. I mean, you have to ask, Raf, if God forbid, if there are injuries to Amy Jones and Lauren Winfield-Hill in the next couple of weeks, Bryony Smith to keep wicket for England in the Ashes. I mean, she gives you runs, and she's obviously competent. Am I completely mad?
The short answer to that is yes. I think we talked about Bryony Smith possibly playing in the Ashes last weekend on the strength of her batting, and my conclusion then was that it would be a very difficult thing to chuck somebody in to play their first international cricket in a while against Australia, just on the basis of some good scores in regionals. And what you're effectively saying is you don't just chuck her in as a batter, you chuck her in as the keeper as well. I think massive credit to Bryony Smith for what she did last weekend. I think, what was it, a couple of catches and a stumping, and as I say, she pulled it off competently. But in a way, there was an element of luck in that. I think Stars did win that game against the Storm in the end. But it could have been a very different story if we'd been talking about, I don't know, Sophie Luff or Fran Wilson edging a catch behind the stumps, a difficult catch that she'd had to dive for, and she dropped it, and then that player went on and made a century and won it for the Storm. And those things do happen, and that's when you need your kind of actual first choice, really competent, more than competent, really skilled, talented wicketkeeper, not somebody who did it for the last time in competitive cricket over a decade ago, Sid. So I think, if I may say so, that's one of your more bonkers suggestions.
Okay. Fair enough.
But well done to Bryony Smith and well done to the Stars for making the best out of a very tricky situation. From where I'm standing, what it shows is that it doesn't matter where you're going in the country and how fit you think your wicketkeeper is, you take a spare. The other kind of big sort of emerging story this season has been the Blaze, hasn't it? Because as well as being so good in the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy, they've also been extremely dominant so far in the Charlotte Edwards Cup, haven't they? And they've just been walking all over everybody. And I believe that just as we're recording this, they've absolutely they've pulled off this absolute thumping of Sunrisers, by over 50 runs, which in T20 cricket is just ridiculous. So, yeah, what's happened with the Blaze? Because they're obviously the new kids on the block this season, aren't they?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And one of the interesting things for me is that on the Naughty Charl podcast, Richard Starkey made the point that with the Blaze, when you look at them on paper, they don't particularly look like they're going to be a better outfit than Sunrisers necessarily. But I mean, just look at the results. But not only that, if you look at their, we've watched them a few times this season, and we've seen them perform against the different teams, and they've made the results count, and they've got over the line repeatedly. And they've done it with lots of different players, and they had to do it without Tammy Beaumont and Nat Stiver the other day, and they did it because Sarah Bryce stood up and made like 70 odd runs off 40 something balls, I think. Fantastic innings. So players have stood up, but still somehow Diamonds actually are the most dominant team. Diamonds are the team that really dominate people. Diamonds are the team that can take it down to the last ball and you're still totally confident they're going to win, because even though it's like the number 10 or 11 batter coming in, you're just like, nah, she's just going to hit this before, and Diamonds are going to win because Diamonds crush everything before them. So it's almost like it's been this weird thing this season where Diamonds have crushed everything before them except Blaze. Blaze have kind of not crushed things, but have sort of weaved their way in and out of people and got over the line. And The key challenge for Blaze, though, is going to be next weekend, right? They're virtually assured, if not right now, by now assured of final state place, probably directly into the final. That's the difficult thing. Who are they going to be facing up to? They're going to be facing up to either the Diamonds or the Vipers, who have both been in a lot of finals. They've both won tournaments over the past couple of years. That's going to be where the challenge comes in, and that's the way that cricket tournaments work, right? It's no good winning the season. You have to then go and win that finals phase, and that's going to be their key challenge. If they can get over the line in that finals phase, then obviously they're going to be champions, and it will have been fantastic. If they can't get over the line in that finals phase, if they fold up at that point, then no one's going to remember them. So they've still got a lot of work to do, and it's their biggest challenge of all next weekend, which is as it should be in a final, against those two big teams with all that finals experience to call upon. Whereas Blaze, those players, most of them have never done it. I think that Loughborough made the Kia Super League final once, did they? Finals day once, but I'm not even sure there's any players left from that time at Loughborough. That institutional memory isn't there. It's going to be a big challenge for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we should clarify that we don't know that it's going to be the Vipers or Diamonds. Neither of them are guaranteed. The only team currently guaranteed to be going to finals day are the Blaze. Yep. And it's likely that they will also be in the final, right? But we have often talked about whether it's actually an advantage to not play in the semi-final. And for a team who, as you say, don't have that memory, don't have that knowledge of what it's like to be at finals day, in a way it would almost be an advantage to be playing in the semi-final, perhaps.
Yeah, soak up a bit of that pressure early on. Get out, find out what the pitch is like, find out what it's like to walk out under that finals day pressure.
I mean, obviously those are the conversations that will be currently happening in the Blaze camp, and they will be trying to prepare the players as best as they can, but there's nothing like actually being there. I do think that whatever happens at finals day, they've laid the groundwork, and that's been really important, because we did say that I think we were just a little bit sceptical that moving from being the Lightning to being the Blaze, just changing your name, and moving from one amazing set of facilities at Loughborough University to another amazing set of facilities at Trent Bridge would actually make a huge amount of difference in terms of the on-field results. For whatever reason, it does seem to have made a difference, and I think that, as I say, whatever happens at finals day, that groundwork has been laid, and it feels like from now on Blaze are going to be one of the teams in contention rather than being one of the teams who are always bringing up the lower middle of the table.
Yeah, massive credit to everyone at Trent Bridge and on the Nottingham staff that's kind of brought them into the fold and given them that kind of self-belief and that mentality, and that's given them the belief that they can get over the line in these games, which is always what you need. At the end of the day, that's all about belief, right? So, fantastic work.
Okay, now let's move on, because there was something else that we wanted to talk about in this week's episode, and it relates to an interview that Thea Brookes, formerly of Central Sparks, did with the new Storylines podcast, hosted by Melissa Story. And in that interview, which was quite a difficult one to listen to, actually, because she was obviously very emotional, and she talked about the fact that in February this year, so only a few months ago, she was sat down by Sparks and told, "You've lost your contract." She wasn't told, go away and never be seen again, but she was told, "You're not going to be on this kind of pay-to-play contract anymore." And she talked about the fact that she just feels like she's kind of been abandoned by cricket, and that she's really struggling to get motivation, that she's been focusing all of her energy and channeling all of the time that would usually go into cricket training into her work. She's got a great job working in cricket at Wellington College, hasn't she? And that actually, she just feels like she's in her early 30s, I believe, and that she's just been kind of left on the sidelines, and that there isn't the structure in place to support her. Now, you obviously would have listened to that interview, Syd, and we've also listened to The Naughty Child, who also discussed that this week. What did you make of it all?
Well, first of all, I think it was a great interview, and I think it's an incredibly positive thing that the Storylines guys have done by actually taking on something that actually challenges the ECB, because with these kind of podcasts, especially the ones that have a little bit of budget behind them and are kind of perhaps a little bit more establishment than we are, if that's a fair thing to say, it can be difficult to kind of put up something in an early episode that actually genuinely challenges the establishment and says, like, this isn't good enough. That's the first positive I want to bring up. So now, but to go to the specifics of the Thea Brookes case, there's really two things here. The first is that kind of this kind of short generation of pay-to-play players were kind of abandoned by the Professional Cricketers Association. So the Professional Cricketers Association was like, well, you're not proper professional cricketers, therefore we're not going to give you sort of half membership, or we're not going to give you any kind of anything at all. We're just going to abandon you. We don't care about you. You're not a proper cricketer. Go away. And that was kind of unacceptable, to be honest. They shouldn't have done that. I don't know what the politics were behind it. I suspect there was some politics behind it. Whether that really came down to the ECB refusing to fund them through the PCA, I don't know, because the PCA basically is essentially directly funded by the ECB. And by a levy through the ECB. So that there could be more to it, but really, it feels like the Professional Cricketers Association's duty was to take on these players. They didn't.
And one of the things that Thea Brookes actually talked about in that interview was, that I think Mel Story actually said to her, "Didn't you get any support from the PCA?" And she said, "No, because I wasn't a PCA member. I'm not a PCA member." And normally, obviously, many cricketers go through this transition from being paid, being effectively professional, to then not being professional overnight, but they get that PCA support. And Thea Brookes has not had that.
Yeah, because she was, and the PCA will make their technicality argument, they weren't proper professionals, they were only paid to play, therefore. But really, in the spirit of like togetherness, and given the situation, they really should have taken these people on and said, look, you will also have access to to just our services and our benefits and our advice and things like that. And that's all she wanted, really. I think she wanted like somebody to feel like somebody cared, and they didn't. So that was the first issue. The other issue is that now that she has left the kind of the top tier, she's left the regionals tier, she's saying, well, there really is nothing left for me, that she's gone to play for Surrey and she's had like 2 games in one day for Surrey, but we know all that county cricket got rained off. There's potentially a few more games for Surrey later in the year if they coincide with her work commitments, but a lot of those games coming up, the London Championship ones, seems to be being played on work days, which are going to clash with her work commitments. That's not the way it always used to be with county cricket, and if county cricket is going to be recreational, it should be being played at weekends. So the fact that there is no county tier anymore, and there's no club tier that's meaningful cricket for someone like Thea Brookes. I mean, she could go along to a club, but honestly, if Thea Brookes goes along to a club, she's going to absolutely dominate games. She could go and open the batting, score 300 runs. She could probably bowl as well, even though she's not a bowler, and 7 or 8 wickets, and
And
what's the point?
Yeah, that's not what she needs. And that was one of the things she was trying to say, was that in order to be competing to try and get that professional contract back, and in order for her to feel motivated to do that, she does not need to be doing that kind of dominant cricket. She needs to be playing with people who are kind of on a par with her.
Yeah, who are challenging her game. Yeah.
And she's saying that the current structure is not set up to deal with players like her who have fallen just short of the regional structure, but are way better than a lot of the recreational cricket women's cricket that's happening in this country. And I think that it kind of points to the problems that we've talked about in previous weeks recently about the lack of investment that the ECB is currently putting into county cricket. And I will say that is not an accident, actually, that the ECB really, a few years ago wanted to get rid of women's county cricket altogether, and they tried to do that. And that the fact that the women's county T20 Cup that is regionally based now, and there is no national finals day, that cup was only there because it was put in place for a couple of years. It was given what we refer to as a stay of execution. Just because it was meant to just be happening while the ECB were putting the funding and the resources in place to strengthen the club structure. So their whole thing was, we just want to get rid of county cricket. We don't see it as being a thing anymore. Now, that's very demoralising for the people who are working really hard in women's county cricket to try and maintain it. But that's the history behind this. So really, what we could do is, with a public acknowledgement from the ECB, to say, no, we got it wrong, and women's county cricket is still really important, and this is the place it has in the system. Because what I really feel is that whenever we have these big new developments within women's cricket, it was exactly the same when they introduced the England contracts in 2014, a decade ago. Now they've introduced these domestic contracts and the new regional structure, but they haven't thought about what's happening underneath and what happens to those people who fall foul of it. From the England perspective, like your Becky Grundys or your Tash Farrants, who just fall just short of that, but what happens to them? And nobody ever seems to think holistically about the structure as a whole, right? So we're doing this really exciting thing, we're putting loads of money into central contracts for England or central contracts for the regions, but what happens around that, what happens underneath that, is so important and should really have been perhaps thought about a little bit more deeply, I think.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, this is going to come down partly to money, right? That
Yeah.
the ECB will say, well, we only had a limited pot of money, we decided to put it into the regions, therefore something had to go. But, here's something they could have done, and here's something they could still do.
Yeah.
Why not do what the Premier League did? Why not say to the men's counties, maybe you'd like to run a women's team, but you have to run a women's team. If you want a license to be if you want to be part of the first class counties set up, you have to run a women's team and take it seriously. And that way the ECB actually have an easy way of doing it, because they can mandate that. They have the power to do that. They have the muscle of being the national governing body. They can tell the counties what to do.
Yeah.
Tell them they have to fund a women's team, and then leave them to work out exactly like football did, by telling those Premier League sides, if you want to continue to be part of this, you have to run a women's team.
Yeah. And then once you have your women's team and you're putting money into it, then it's a virtuous circle, because you then want your women's team to be successful, like with Manchester United in women's football.
Nobody wants to set up a team and have them lose.
Yeah.
So at that point, you're also effectively forcing the counties to take it seriously, because there'll be eyes on it for the first time. So
now, of course, the counties, the men's first class counties will say, well, we do all have women's teams. They do, but they're being run on an absolute shoestring for less than £1,000 a year to try and run a women's team. And there's a tiny number of fixtures for most of the counties, okay? So what you're saying is, no, you have to do it properly. You have to give them the kit, give them the coaches, give them the matches throughout the season, and run it like you would a men's team.
Yeah, and we can find a way of doing that, because you guys can find a way of doing that.
Yeah.
Pass the problem on to them.
Absolutely.
If the ECB say it's too much money for us, we can't do it, you have a way to give the problem to someone else.
Now, may I say, Sid, that in the space of one 25-minute podcast, you've had your worst idea in history, which was throwing Bryony Smith in to keep wicket during the Ashes, and your best idea in history, which is this idea of the ECB mandating the men's first class counties, if they want to retain first class status, to actually they have to have a women's team and they have to run it properly. So congratulations for that. You've gone from bonkers to brilliant in the space of 25 minutes. And I think that's a good place to end this episode. Thanks for tuning in, as ever. See you in a week.